and ask, Rachel, to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Comments from items not on the, from the public items not on the agenda. Matt, got anything? Anybody? Okay. All right, Tian, no? Board acknowledgements. Wow, great. Happy holidays all. As we head on our merry way after a couple more meetings. Wrap up and enjoy our time. All right, we are moving right along and we are ahead of schedule. Let me say that now before we're not. All right. I will take a motion on the consent agenda, please.
I will move that we accept the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
I almost said I move that we consent to the agenda. But
And we are moving right along. Mark, I think it's your turn. If we're you and perhaps Roger is joining us, I would imagine.
Oh, Roger's here. Good. Hey, Roger.
excited to visit. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Well,
Round two.
Hi, everybody, and special thanks to our buddy Connor from RETN. We got here about the same time around 6:15, and the door was locked, and we were not set up. So I've never seen
Super.
anybody set up so quickly as did Connor tonight. So job well done, guy. We are live and ready to go. Also brought an apple pie to get Dan away from those chocolate. It's not terribly healthy, but it's healthier than that bag. So help yourself. We did promise Connor a piece and Fort Matt, and Kimberly will get you a piece as well if you'd like. Fresh from Shaw's, yum.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. So this is session 4 of our budget series, and Roger, would like to invite Roger to the table. This is our best estimate on the revenue projection. We expected some information today from the AOE, which unfortunately didn't arrive. It will arrive tomorrow. So I really appreciate Roger's best crystal ball work, but I think that he's done some good work, and based on what we do know at this time. So if you go over to start the show, Roger, all the way to the left on the top toolbar. Yep.
There?
Yep. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about the first couple slides, and then I'll set the context for Roger to take it from there. Really, very briefly, there's a lot of slides. Roger and I reviewed them again tonight and thought they were all important, instructive, interesting, informative, all of that. But really, there's a few things that just to pay attention to tonight. And remember that from the last presentation on the 8th of December, yes, that was last Monday night, it's a little under $50,000 for new investments above and beyond the rollover that you saw on December 1st, 2014. So it's a very modest investment over what we knew we were going to be paying for this year. We also are projecting less than a 3% draw from the Ed Fund. The challenges to all school boards coming from the state was they were expecting that there'd be a little over a 3% draw, and we're under that. So that's something to be proud of, I guess, if nothing more. Less than a 3% tax impact based on what we know today, which again we think is a good thing. Budget to budget increase is aligned with New England Consumer Price Index, slightly above based on last year's index, but again, that's another indicator that we pay attention to when trying to make these numbers work. And finally, the per pupil cost is right in line and average, only a few dollars more than what last year's state average was. And we've been over the last number of years, if you look at the history, and we have that slide for you, I think, tonight. If not, we will get it to you. We've been under the state average and only slightly above in the last 5 years. And so another index or indicator that the community looks at is what do we look like compared to the state? And based on this metric, we feel we've got a pretty, right at this moment, a budget that is responsible. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Roger. You can walk us in. Please, I think the way we should run it is just, if you have questions, again, just stop us.
Oh,
Boy, we'll step on this.
Did Matt, did you get one?
All right, we're good.
Good. So repeating the budget amount that we reviewed last week, a budget of $21,613,290, an increase of a little over $795,000, which represents a 3.8% increase. And actually, there was a typo in the info you had last week. The increase on a percentage basis was mentioned as 3.2. The specific increase is 3.82 when I was doing those numbers. Somehow I missed the 8. I apologize. The same figures. There have been no changes, and we don't anticipate any changes until the legislature finalizes the numbers sometime within the next couple months. The state homestead tax rate that has been suggested that we use for all calculations is a $1, an increase of 2 cents from last year, and the per pupil base funding $34.59, which is up from $9,285 this year. We'll get into more detail on our projections on tax rates, but at this point it looks like for the budget only, the tax rate would be approximately a 2.8% increase. If we included $230,000, the number that we mentioned a week or two ago for capital reserve as a possibility, that would increase the taxes 4.2%. The next slide, in large type so you can easily read it, is a slide that we've, I couldn't figure out how to make that bigger tonight, so, yes. That's all of our sources of revenue. In a minute, we're going to break that down into the 3 major categories: local, state, and federal in bigger font. But you'll, those same sources of revenue, by the way, board members, are the sources that are listed each month on the revenue report that you get with other business office financial information.
I'd like to point out just 2 lines that I think are of interest. One is, although our special ed costs have gone up, and Roger will show another slide, you can see under state revenue, second line down, that we're projecting, a $400,000 increase in revenue. And then if you go down to the bottom where it says Medicaid reimbursement, if you recall, over the last couple of years, we've been concerned about how much we're drawing with Medicaid, and we're projecting for next year nearly $250,000. So that's a big increase. Yes. And bravo to the Medicaid support people, Tina Carroll in particular, for being aggressive in finding those dollars. Yes. It's very notable.
So we're making well over $400,000 more
projected.
In FY6 projected.
Right, because the service plan is more, which generates more revenue.
You'll notice comparing the 2 grand totals for FY15 and FY16, the increase in revenue matches the increase in the proposed budget. Revenue has to equal proposed expenditures. So moving ahead, local revenue. For each of the coming revenue slides, we'll be showing you the numbers with what our actual revenue was in the first numbers column on the left, our actual revenue for last year, what was budgeted for this year. If we, at this point, are predicting any changes for this year, next year's revenue, FY16, and then in the far right column, the change from FY15 budget to FY16 budget. So just top line, for example, we do try to keep our estimates for the new year as close as possible to what our actual experience is. Actually, if you look for FY14 actual, that number is pretty close to what we had budgeted for this year. Oftentimes, though, we don't know the actual till the end of the year, of course, and the next year's budget was developed 6 months earlier. So, say, for example, our experience last year in interest rates, a little under $40,000, we had budgeted $45,000 for this year based on trends in earlier years. So we know that we're not going to get $45,000 this year. We've already adjusted our estimate downward for this year on the monthly reports that you receive, and our estimate has been reduced for next year too. A couple lines that I would like to point out, actually gifts and donations, just to remind the board that money comes largely from the Essex PTO and supporting special programs in each of the 3 schools, so that money is greatly appreciated. We do get some other far less large donations during the year too. Vermont Community Foundation, you've known that the past couple years we've received money to support expanding our Act 62 pre-K program. This is the last year for that support as far as we know it, so that's a decrease for next year. Oh, the line just above that is the other one that I wanted to draw your attention to. It wasn't known at the time we built this year's budget, but in fact we are going to receive $25,000 this year from the Y After School program, and that revenue is also projected then for next year. So those are the 2 biggest changes. In total for local revenue from FY15 to FY16, we're projecting a decrease of just $525. Fund balance, we're already aware of what our fund balance was for that will carry forward to next year. That is actually, I'm off a year on these, I see, because that's the fund balance from FY14 that is going into the FY16 budget. Thought it would be handy to show you how the fund balances carry forward, and I apologize that I did not do it correctly.
So the one,
Okay,
2
so-
lines over
Yeah,
should
we're
be
off,
FY13.
yeah, right. The fund balance for the FY14 budget came from FY12. So
Okay.
it was what was left over. Just like the money that was left over, excess revenue and savings from the budget at the end of FY14, June of 2014, the FY15 budget was already built, so that money is not then used as a revenue until the following year, FY16. So, and then one last thing I just wanted to remind you of at the bottom of the page, when we actually spend money from the capital reserve fund, then that is brought into the actual revenue for that year. So in FY14 we spent almost $220,000. FY15, an amendment that you just approved recently, bringing in $236,000, excuse me, and but we don't plan on a revenue for next year because there's no expense in next year's budget. Yeah. State revenue. These are the numbers that we've been waiting for from the state. Actually, just at about 3 o'clock this afternoon, the number for transportation aid, the top line there, came in, the budgeted number for next year, $331,000, up about $9,000 from the FY15 budget. That the transportation, we were told today, that number was based on our actual transportation expenses for last school year, for FY14, and the state is reimbursing all school districts at a rate of 40.2% for their actual transportation expenses for the year before. Just Friday afternoon, we got the next number that Mark had already spoke of, the estimated special education reimbursement from the state, up $380,000 from the current year. That special ed reimbursement at this point is being calculated at a rate of 56.3%. We receive 56 cents on every dollar projected in expense for next year. Jumping down, I would also like to point out, just in terms of estimated, you'll see that estimated special ed reimbursement and the extraordinary special ed reimbursement for certain high-cost students this year. The numbers currently estimated are the same as shown in the budget, we aren't generally able to update those estimates till closer to the end of the year. So I did want to highlight that those will not remain exactly the same. You'll see budget to actual and transportation. There was a slight change. The other two numbers that we received from the state on Friday were the mainstream block grant and the early essential education grant. Both of those numbers are up somewhat from the current year. Those, once the state tells us the number, that does not change based on actual expense.
Again, just to remind the board, the backstory behind the extraordinary costs for students who cost more than $50,000 a year, the state reimburses not 56%, but 90% of those costs over $50,000. But the backstory is, you know, back in FY11, F12 up to FY14, we were educating kids out of district. So the focus has been building capacity in the district to reduce or minimize those out of district costs. So yes, the service plan's gone up by nearly $400,000, but what's I think notable is that we're serving those kids in district, and that would be a much higher number if we didn't have capacity to serve them here and had to send them elsewhere, in their home they're in their hometown.
Yep.
So,
Lastly, superintendent has already spoken of Medicaid revenue. We received almost $250,000 in Medicaid revenue last school year, which was quite a bit higher than our receipts in the past. We would have probably had a higher budget number for this year if we knew that we had the capacity to increase our actual revenue. So you'll see that I will anticipate a higher amount this year in the revenue projections for FY15 that you'll get monthly, but also we can safely assume that we will see an increase next year. So that's a year-to-year increase of $65,000. In total, state revenue up $447,000 for the coming year. For a little bit more detail on special ed, we've alluded to the fact in the past that the net local cost for the special ed program, looking at the last two rows of the chart, in the coming year, you saw this number last week, about $5.3 million for special ed expenses in the proposed budget, an increase of $470,000. Next line, special education revenue from the state sources that you just saw, and also adding in federal IDEA money for special ed. That's a budget change year to year of almost $472,000, just about equaling the increase in expenses. So if you take the budgeted amount for delivering the services, deduct the estimated reimbursement and aid that we will receive, that leaves a net cost of $1.7 million, which is 32.5% of the total cost. So the net local cost for providing services, special services for certain youngsters is a noteworthy point. What I've shown you, just going back a couple years, and you can look at your slides later, but for example, FY13, we had estimated a net local cost of $292, and a percentage of 30.8. The final percentage actually ended up being 29.8. Each year, what we estimate and tell the public about at the time of budget development, our actual expense by the end of the year comes in very close to that. So I thought that was important to share with you. Federal revenue, the IDEA grants and the title grants. This year we had budgeted $543,000. The IDEA grant in particular came in higher for the year than budgeted. The state releases what they estimate to be our IDEA grant amounts for the next year at this time, mid-December, but there are often changes before the grant numbers are finalized in June. So those are changes done at the the state level. Title grant dollars, we don't hear the projected amount at this time of the year. Those numbers aren't known until the end of May or beginning of June. I called the state today, also Ellen Thompson did, just to see if they hearing anything, and to use the director's words, the chatter on the street is that the numbers that we're receiving this year should continue into next year. But again, that's what they think to be the case at this point.
It's a safe bet.
So
Yeah.
that number from an IDEA that was just received from the state, so we're predicting $33,700 increase in IDEA funds. Title I about $40,000. Title IIA $1,400. In total, federal revenue projected for next year versus this year's revenue, an increase of $50,199. One thing while we were talking about federal revenue that I did want to share, and this is a change that we're needing to work into our budgets. The state legislature last year passed a law, or a couple points of law, relative to the teachers' retirement system. The first change in the top part of this slide is that new in FY16, salaries that are funded by federal grants, IDEA and Title, that the grants will have to pay pension expense to the Vermont State Teachers Retirement, which we just got this number last Thursday, that the rate of contribution would be 12.84%. Now you'll remember that for all teachers in the past, both teachers paid for by the general fund and those paid by federal grants, that the retirement expense was not a cost to the district, but rather that was paid from the state education fund. So this is a new change that will need to be accounted for in the grants, and ultimately, if more money has to go in grants for benefits, this retirement expense, then there will be less money available for salaries, and so those salaries will, the increase in the salaries will be to the general fund, will be an expense that we'll need to budget. Just looking at this year's actual salaries paid for from the grants, $391,500. If that same amount was paid next year from grants, we would have hoped to have been able to pay a little bit more from grants, but just that same amount now would result in a retirement contribution due of $50,000, making less available for salaries if the grant amount stayed the same. So it's a mathematical computation to figure in increased salaries, increased health insurance and other benefits, and now add this in and see how much salary the grants can pay for. The other new item in the bottom section of the page, other post-employment benefits. The state has done calculations and believes that they need to increase the funding that they have set aside for future retirees for their post-employment benefits, and new to the district next year, we will need to pay that amount, $1,087, for each and every teacher, general fund teacher or federal teacher, that is new to the teachers' retirement system as of July 1st, this coming July 1st. So that amount will increase annually, and it's not just a one-time charge for new teachers, but it will be a charge that will pay for anyone who's new to the retirement system for each year of their employment going forward. So
It's a pretty big deal. I mean, this came out as among the solutions to solving the retiree health benefit problem that they had at the state level, but it was an arrangement made at the state level that's now being fixed at the local level. So it's not that that never happens to us. It's just that was something that I know the VSBA did a lot of work to try not to have to necessarily have that be an ongoing and additional expense to local districts, because the arrangement was made by the state at the state level. So it could be quite burdensome as we see our teaching staff, and I'm sure Mark and Roger can speak to it better than I. The average age, the average tenure of our teaching staff would imply that we'll see some turnover in the coming years, and along with that would be those coming in with that additional cost.
So if they're already in the system, so let's say a teacher who's been somewhere else and is already in the system and they get hired by us, would that apply or no?
No.
So it's only brand new teachers. So basically all graduating teachers are all teachers who haven't yet found a job. It, in some ways could almost hurt them.
Yes.
Correct.
But it's for them, and then at some point it's going to affect us all, because once they're on it, even if they move, once
Yeah, it'll
Once
be
it's
based
there,
on,
Once
it's
it's
there.
there on
date of
that
hire.
person.
Increasing.
Okay.
And actually, the
That's
retirement system has told us that each fall, they will send us a list after we first report who's on our payroll for that year, and they will have a database that knows if someone is new to the system or coming from another district or whatever. But so anyone that's new to the retirement system, beginning teachers, will be on that list. For budget purposes, I assumed that we would encounter 5 of those charges in the coming year. I thought we should add that line to the budget and have something budgeted, but again, we often hire teachers that have had experience elsewhere, so then that charge wouldn't appear. That was a number that was just finalized last Thursday also. Earlier, the estimate was $1,065. Did want to make clear also the charge basically to the school district from these federal grants of 12.84%. That's like what the employer's share. Employees will still be contributing 5%, and part of the same legislation, new employees will be contributing 6% going forward. So there's so the total cost for retirement is that 12.84 plus another 5 or 6% depending upon the date of hire of teachers.
This is just a curiosity of mine, Roger. So if we are being billed at that rate, should I presume that the state is funding their liability at that rate?
Correct. Yes. Yep, and that's a number that we've never really seen
privy to,
before.
right.
Yes. I know I'm aware of what the number is in New York State, for example, because that's a number that the district has to take into account in their budgets each year. Here in Vermont, with that not being the case, it's never been publicized, and actually you'll see a little change in the second draft budget, because not knowing what that number was, I had assumed that maybe it was a lower number, and in the first draft budget I had put about $25,000 in to cover that difference, and now we'll need another $25,000 approximately. So.
And not to belabor the point, but that 1,087 is not negotiated locally. So, as was the case with the agency fee and other things that are not negotiated, but most certainly impact our personnel expense. We've not had the opportunity to negotiate on those points locally, and yet they become a cost of our budgets locally.
And it'll be a minor expense in the coming year, but with each ensuing year, that will become a more significant number. And years from now, there'll be that charge on every employee or every teacher. It's not on support staff.
And that number can go up from year to
Yes,
year.
it will go.
Yeah.
It will go up.
It will go up.
Yeah, exactly. So
Actually,
that could
just
get
like
exponential
just like the 12.84%, that will be actuarially determined each year and revised. So, a summary then of all the revenue information that you've heard. Local revenue, a decrease of $525. Fund balance, almost $51,000 less in the coming year. You saw that the State reimbursements for special education and transportation up $447,000, and a $50,000 increase in federal revenue. So this is, that subtotal line is what the state calls offsetting revenue. You take your entire budget, deduct that offsetting revenue, and then that then equals the draw that you need to take the balance of the revenue that the school needs to balance the budget comes from the state education fund. So in total, our expense, or our budgeted revenue, increasing $795,000. And as the superintendent already mentioned, and this was just confirmed at a meeting last Friday, the estimated increase statewide in terms of increases in education fund draws is 3.1%. Ours at this point very favorably calculates at 2.1%. So,
Sorry for the typo.
pardon me?
Sorry for the typo.
Yeah.
Do you see the typo? Connor picked it up.
So far I don't. As,
A piece of pie for
Oh,
whoever
got
can
it,
find it.
estimated.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
oh, don't worry.
Matt was
There's
all over it.
Yes.
Matt was all over it.
there's one worse. There's one worse than
There's a
that
bigger
that I've
one than
already found. So.
The one thing I'll say that I think is impressive, and we've had other times where we've had bigger fund balances, impressive from the standpoint that your budgeting is really sliding in there pretty tight to
Yeah.
what our actuals are at the end of our year, and that is a good thing.
Yeah.
There have been times where there have either been changes in accounting rules or whatever
Mhm.
that have given us a larger margin on that, but year over year, Roger, I noticed that you're doing a tremendous job at really looking at our budget, our actuals, and estimating going forward in a way that feels as though our community should really trust the hard work you're doing. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for that compliment. I guess in terms of an old-fashioned report card, that would get a pretty good score, where spelling would be N for needs improvement.
I'm going to say that's a 4. You are exceeding
I-
expectations.
There we go.
Of course, I like to do
And
my
that's
work.
the
Look at
business
the whole
officer.
run.
Yeah.
Look at the whole run.
I can't wait till Excel comes out with a spell check
spell
in,
check.
in
That
their.
is, I'm surprised
yeah.
they have it.
Yes.
That really makes sense.
Or maybe they have it and I just don't know how to.
Yeah, find it.
We always touch real quickly on common level of appraisal. Phone message on Friday afternoon at about 4:30 from the Director of Finance from the town was that they still have not seen anything on the new year common level of appraisal and don't expect it for another week or two. So that will end up changing slightly each year. The calculation of how our property value compares to assessed value changes slightly, and it will have a minor impact on taxes, but we don't have that yet. This busy slide is the same one that we've looked at in the past, comparing budget information going back a few years, increases in the budget and percent increases, state education fund info, tax rate info, and equalized pupils and per pupil spending. Again, the new improved Roger has this year thought, let's break all of those pieces or all those parts into individual slides. So this is the same slide, just with the budget information going back a couple years earlier. So our percentage change projected in the first draft budget of 3.8%, 3.82 to be exact, a little bit higher than what the percentage changes in the budgets were the past couple years, less though than the FY13 budget. Just to keep the discussion on the table, the budget with reserve assumes that we would ask a question on the budget vote date for approval of a capital reserve proposition in the amount of $230,000. Obviously, that amount has not been finalized by the board or determined with certainty that we would even ask for that separate resolution, but that gives you the comparison. The budget would be up 4.9% if we did that. The state education fund draw compared to prior years, I've already discussed that our increase would be 349,000 in the new year, rounding up 2.1%. If we did do the reserve, it would be an increase of 3.4. To reiterate, we are below the projected statewide increase for this year, and our projected increase for next year is lower than it's been in the past few years. Equalized pupils. The deadline has always been that we would receive that number by December 15th, so I was hoping to get that. I know they were cutting off the any changes that districts would have in their reported enrollment for the current year or last year at 3 o'clock today, and I was hoping that by about 4:30 we would get the new equalized pupil number, but we did not. We're told that it'll come tomorrow. So that is an estimate, and of course that equalized pupil amount number, the number of pupils, affects the calculation of taxes and so forth. So that is my best estimate at this point, but down slightly from the current year. I don't know as the high school number would change. I don't believe that would. The variance is coming and is taking longer because the state is allowing people to claim additional pre-K students for the coming year to offset the additional expense if we're going to universal pre-K. So we have to stay tuned on that. Comparison of proposed FY16 tax. I don't know how to pronounce the next word. People used to call them tax rates, but I didn't think that was special enough, so I worked at revising that, I think after dinner Saturday evening, and maybe I was having indigestion. I don't know. So,
Oh, that's funny.
do you agree, Superintendent? Isn't that a better
I think we picked up that
faux
typo
pas
like
than
this.
Matt's
Yeah. We should work on that for next week. What does that mean?
It's all about bringing a little levity into the board
The
meeting.
hidden typos.
little unintentional levity? So, that was discovered after the copies were made, but before I arrived. So, we already looked at the numbers that our projection, if the equalized pupils holds reasonably close, that the tax rate would go up about 2.8%, a little under 4.2 if we went forward with the capital reserve at $230,000. You'll see that the projected dollar changes, 2680 and 3980. Even the larger one with the capital reserve is below the dollar change that we experienced last year, where taxes went up a total of 8.2%. Those numbers also compare favorably to what our actual experience was in FY14. The high school does not have estimated rates to share yet, so
I was
those
hoping
spaces.
the answer was 0.
Yeah, no, the answer's not
Whatever
0.
they're doing is helping.
Yeah.
No.
I believe we discussed the fact at our last meeting that we used this methodology in our public materials last year to explain how our total tax increase landed at almost 8.2%, and we went through a number of items, a decrease in local and state and federal reimbursements, equalized pupils change in common level of appraisal, and then the increase in the state tax rate by 4 cents. In total, all of that raised our tax rate 4.94% if the budget had stayed the same as the previous year. And then, of course, we knew that the budget had to increase, or we factored in an increase, so that raised taxes another 2.43% increase in our local budget, and then another 0.8% increase for the voter-approved capital reserve. So that's what totaled then 8.2. I know we were discussing last week if we would have a similar analysis for the proposed FY16 budget. I do have that information. You'll see that at this point it's a far different scenario. Top line here, where last year 1.44% increase in taxes because of a decrease in offsetting revenue. Well, this year offsetting revenue is increasing. So that actually, if we ran the same budget again and the same amount or started that we needed the same amount from the state education fund, but then could deduct the increase in local and federal and state revenue, almost $498,000, that would have the effect of lowering taxes 2.95%. Equalized pupils will have some factor that will change a little bit when we get the actual number. CLA, we don't know yet. The 2-cent increase from the state, taken in concert with the increase in per pupil base funding, has just a negligible impact in terms of tax increase. So it's then our budget increase and the additional money that we need from the state education fund that results in a 2.8% increase. So a very different situation than we faced last year. Education fund spending per pupil, same thing that we've looked back a few years on that. Again, we're just using a tentative number for equalized pupils pre-K to 8 until tomorrow. But if those numbers hold true, our spending per pupil next year would be $14,078. We don't know what the average spending per equalized pupil will be yet in FY16. At a business officials meeting last Friday, I asked the question, and they sent that information out to business officials across the state then Friday afternoon. $14,009. That was the final average spending based on finalized budgets. That wasn't finalized till June or July. Earlier, the number that we were working with last year was a little bit higher than that. So our proposed spending for next year per equalized pupils would only be $69 greater than last year's actual average. Notice that the past 2 years, our spending per pupil, for example, FY15 spending per pupil, $13,717, statewide average $14,009, so we were $292 below the state average. Same thing, FY14, $322 below the state average, and FY13 we were above the state average by $57. So I think it's very likely that our proposed spending per pupil next year would be below the state average. The penalty threshold, where there's severe tax implications, that number has been released by the state. That would be the penalty threshold for next year, so we're some $3,000 below that. That penalty threshold has never really been an issue for our district, and most likely won't be for some time. Just to remind the board how this calculation spending per pupil, start with the entire budget, deduct the offsetting revenue that we saw before, local revenue, fund balance, state revenue, and federal revenue. After deducting that from the budget, that determines the amount that we need to ask from the state education fund. divide that number by the number of equalized pupils, pre-K to grade 8, and that calculation results in a number $14,238. We do get some credit for debt service payments that the district is making. That number, as our debt payments trail off with each passing year, that credit goes down. But when you deduct that credit from the gross spending per pupil, that calculates to our net spending per pupil. And then again, the next to the bottom couple lines just run through those same comparisons to Vermont average spending the year before and the new penalty threshold.
I have no idea why they think they need to simplify the funding formula. Clear as mud.
So, at this point, we could take questions on the information we've presented. I know last week you asked for some numeric summaries. So again, repeating the budget increase, a little over 3.8%. A 1% increase in the budget is $216,000. However, if we add just $208,000 to the budget, that increases it exactly 1%. Tax rate increase of 2.8% projected as of tonight. About every $170,000 that we add to the tax calculation results in a 1% increase in taxes. And I think there were other scenarios you wanted me to. I know one other calculation that I did after printing this was that and I think we were discussing this in terms of the reserve. Well, what if we put a proposition out for a $100,000 addition to the $100,000 in the reserve would equal a 0.6% increase in taxes. So.
Well, it's not 6%.
0.6. $100,000.
$100,000.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Any questions, guys?
I think it's laid out very well. You're getting good at this.
Thank you.
Maybe it's that I'm getting better at understanding.
There's that too. I was wondering, seeing this first time around, cash flow is
Yeah, it's a lot of
where
information.
it's a lot of information. So feel free to ask questions because
Yeah, no,
we're
I'm-
just beginning to sort of
Yeah.
really wrap our heads
Right.
around it after a lot of years. But I would agree, Dan, that it feels pretty clear to me. But I don't want to
Yeah,
presume.
no, I agree. Yeah.
There's also redundancies in the slide, which I think is important because it just brings
Yeah.
back
Yeah,
the most
yeah,
important
yeah.
pieces of this just to
Right.
get it in
Yes.
Yeah.
for talking points.
The optimism that the most optimistic thing that I see is definitely that slide you had last year where we were all just ready to just crawl off in a corner because if we did nothing, our taxes went up by 5% or, approximately. And this year, just not quite fully the opposite, but the state is helping us out some. If we do nothing, our tax rates go down by.
We refer to that as the Dan House slide. 'Cause that was a really good question that you had asked, and Roger took the challenge on, and actually it's a strategy and tool that's been shared across the state, so job well done. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to see.
You're right, though. Definitely a very different situation. So.
Yeah. Doesn't help us
I'm
as much as it did last year.
right. Does anybody have any other thoughts or questions? I do have one. It looks like Rachel may have one.
No,
We'll
I'm
take
just
over time.
absorbing all the numbers right
Okay.
now. No, I don't have any questions right now.
One of the things that occurred to me, like, as we were going through, is that 230, I think it was, for capital reserve. It feels as though we may want to flesh out that piece of the conversation sooner rather than later, because those two columns then run just parallel, and it's either without capital reserve or with an assumption of something. It's pretty substantial. It's much greater than that which we had last year.
Correct.
Or any year, I think, where we didn't have some other source that was helping us fund that article. And so it causes me to feel as though we should sort of discuss at the table what is our consensus on asking for that article, and do we have the list of things? I know they're not with us tonight, but before we're running sort of an assumption on something that's substantially higher than maybe we would be looking at, I'd love to hear from everybody on what we're thinking on this, and then maybe either provide some guidance on what, if the per 100,000 is a better assumption, because we could manipulate those numbers more easily, that we pick something that we're using as an assumption. But then one of the things I'd like to see is sort of our rolling list of where we stand on those capital improvement projects, and the sort of priority around the immediacy of action on those things, so that we might have something a little more substantial. Obviously, it'd be great if we could do all of them, and I know that it exceeds that which we could ask for in 5 years. So that was my thinking on that, but I'd love to hear from you folks. And I know Dave had some concerns around the capital reserve idea or the article, you know, and I'd love for all of us to sort of weigh in on where we are on that, if that is helpful to this conversation at this point.
Another consideration of mine is that for years, before you people were on the board, and Roger and Mark were around, we always kind of bragged or whatever that, well, when these bonds are paid off, that will reduce taxes. But if we take those reductions and put it direct into additional spending, that kind of wipes out what we've been talking about in semi-ancient history. I guess that I kind of have a problem with that, because I think that we should be upfront with total cost for the district, including necessary maintenance functions, to be included in the regular budget, and not as an add-on. That the way that we always used to speak of it was that, as I stated previously, that the capital reserve fund would be for if the boiler at one of the schools was to up and die some weekend, money could be yanked to replace the boiler spur of the moment without really affecting the budget.
One of the things I wonder in there, David, is so where it doesn't just up and break down, but we're having to plan for it needing to be replaced, let's say. And I don't have the vaguest idea what that cost would be, but it wouldn't be in the realm of sort of an ongoing maintenance item. It would actually be the replacement of a depreciable asset. So one of the things that struck me initially coming onto the board before we had this was the inability to basically carry over funds in a way that you could save like you would in your own household, put money aside and you'd be holding on to it, because we know in the next 4 years we're going to need to replace our boiler. But budgeting in public school budgets, it doesn't lend itself to that idea. And so it doesn't allow for that strategic financial planning for those larger expenses that you and I might do in our households if we knew that were coming because of the age of the piece of equipment. It's not in the I feel like getting new curtains category. It's more, boy, there's just no way this is going to come out of our operating budget at home. And so if we're going to need to do this in the next couple of years, we need to plan for it. And we in our households would be able to carry that money over in a savings account. And in public school budgeting, I learned early on that that doesn't happen. And so that was the biggest reason that we felt pretty strongly about putting in a capital reserve fund to be strategic about planning for those bigger coming expenses, not the ongoing maintenance ones, though I agree. I mean, that we need to not get rid of an operation and maintenance line item in lieu of a capital reserve fund, because I think by virtue of their name, they're doing different things and they should be doing different things. It's the only way we can kind of save for the big stuff.
But if
Right.
we're saving for the big stuff, because I guess, just looking at it, so we have our list and we're kind of almost planning for the list. So are we using up our capital reserve though every year, so we're not then saving for those big items? So that's just the one question I have. So I think of it like, okay, if I'm having to save for a roof in my house, I'm not touching that money for anything else. But I don't know, is that how we're using it, or are we using it for a variety of things that still might, not to say that that would come out of our operating expense, but in some ways, maybe some of these items are just being funneled a different way.
In history, I believe it was this school, after X number of years from when it was built and initially occupied in '79, it was realized carpets were getting tattered, and after they were taped and whatnot, as I recall, we put in perhaps 8 classrooms per year for carpet replacement. We try to do 8 this year, 8 the next year, and 8 the following year. But correct me if I'm wrong, I think that in the capital reserve funds, all carpet was ripped out of the elementary school this last year. Do I remember correctly on that?
One shot deal, right?
That almost looked like more of a planned thing than to say, gee, the carpet's in this classroom, and this classroom, and this classroom, because they're tattered and the edges are curled up, it's an unsafe tripping hazard. We've got to include that in the budget. That's different than scheduled long-term replacement over a certain period of years.
Yeah, I guess I just don't want to see us get caught where, we suddenly do have a boiler blow and the capital reserve, which is kind of intended for those big ticket items, is already used because it's been used on other items leading up.
But
So I think we
using the
just do have
example of
to
a
be
boiler, you
careful.
can take a look at a boiler and say, gee, that's in good condition, but you can't see the rust coming through from the inside. So
We don't
you
know.
could all of a sudden come to school someday and find 2 feet of water in the boiler room because it sprung a leak or a pipe rusted through from the inside. There's no way that scheduled maintenance can take care of something like that, the unseen.
Yeah, I think one thing that's happened, and I'm certainly no expert on the budget from 15, 10, 5 years ago, but it seems like a lot of these big ticket items, which had we had a capital reserve of $100,000 a year since 1980, we would be cruising through these capital projects because we'd have that big capital budget. The problem we're running into is we want a capital budget for the emergency boiler. We're also pulling trying to get ourselves above water from all the capital projects that we didn't do for the last 15 years. And so there's those two things tugging at the capital reserve. I think the sidewalks and the carpet, that list, I think it's all legitimately capital reserve stuff. The problem is it's not quite a capital reserve yet because we haven't built up the reserve. And we're bailing as fast as we can, but we're just barely bailing faster than the boat is sinking. When it comes to capital, we're very, very, we're bailing out a bunch, but we're not getting $200,000 ahead by putting $200,000 away because we're spending it.
When I think about the unanticipated, or maybe it would have been anticipated, but we certainly were in a position to be able to react to improvements in security in our buildings by virtue of having the capital reserve. And we wouldn't have been in a position to have responded to that as well or as quickly as we were able to. And that meant that some other things that maybe were at the top of the priority list weren't able to happen. And so that strikes me as an example of why it is so critically important that we have a place that we can definitely provide feedback to the list and the priority and make certain that we're preserving the idea that we have operation and maintenance, ongoing maintenance in our buildings happening. But so much of what I've had seen when we first got here was that, boy, that maintenance line item felt less like it impacted kids, and budgets got tighter and tighter and tighter. And deferred maintenance becomes very expensive and then becomes a huge expense. And so that's the case in our own homes, and it's the case in our buildings. And I know that we've not, gutted those line items in any way, but culling them what they they are, so the scheduled things that are ongoing maintenance can happen, but those larger things that, for example, in our own home, we'd be saving for, whatever, refrigerator or something, that it's not gone yet, but it's going on 15, 20 years. Like, let's anticipate that we're going to have some appliances go.
Maybe I can give an example from my own experience. On my flatbed trailer, it's got 4 wheels, 4 tires. I could walk all around that trailer and say, I've got good tread on all 4 tires. It was beyond my comprehension that I had 3 blowouts in 3 weeks' time on that trailer. There was nothing that told me that I was going to have a blowout. It happened once on the interstate in Winooski, once on the interstate in Montpelier, and once at the end of the driveway at camp.
Yeah, those things happen.
We never anticipated any of those.
Yep.
But I could look at those tires and say, gee, there's plenty of tread on those
Right.
things.
Right. What you could
Yeah.
see, you could look at and plan for.
But it's just the
Maybe
same
we-
as some of this other
Yeah.
stuff.
So-
Stuff that you can see, you can schedule it. Stuff that you can't see, to me, that is the purpose of the capital reserve fund. Another thing that in history we were looking at the capital reserve fund, we knew that our mixers in the kitchens were going bad. We knew that they were single phase. 3-phase was also more economical. But we could not see replacing those until they died. All of a sudden, you could throw the switch on that mixer one day and the motor starts burning. You don't anticipate that because the paint on the outside of the unit is still nice and gray.
I don't think anybody disputes that unexpected disasters, blowouts, burned out motors fits the category of the capital reserve. But I think we can't say something, there's going to be a lot of negatives in this statement, sorry. We can't say something doesn't fit the capital reserve just because we can predict it's going to go down. If we know this car is going to last 10 years, well, that doesn't mean it doesn't count as a, just because we can predict it's going to last this long, doesn't mean it's not a capital reserve project.
I
Now,
get
granted,
the-
if it blows out in 8 years, okay, it's a more urgent capital reserve project.
But
But
we can't save for it without that account. We can't go year
Yeah,
over year
exactly.
with a plan and be strategic about how we're saving for it. So I don't think it's a question of whether or not we should have a capital reserve fund. That was asked and answered, and I think been well responded to by the community by virtue of, even though our budgets have passed, that article has passed by even a little bit more in terms of margin than that, meaning some people said no on the budget and said yes on the capital reserve. So it helps me believe that people really understand the purpose and intention of it. And I think we just have to be very disciplined to what's on our list and sort of understanding where things fall in priority and why. But I'm thinking in that it sounds as though, and it has been general consensus, that that article is important, and even when we've been concerned about the overall operating budget increase, we felt like last year that even asking for the 75,000 was important. And so if we continue to believe that this is an important article and it's well supported by our community, what is the number that we might want to be seeing, at least as our maybe assumption number? I get nervous that the 230 feels really big and pops those numbers up quickly when we haven't really seen a list and isn't an easy number to navigate from, where like 100,000 is easier to navigate from. You can say that increases it by this % up or down, and you can manipulate numbers. You say, okay, that would mean 150 equals this. So I'm wondering how we feel about giving these guys some guidance before, maybe the next round, and then share with us our list, and then we can say,
Certainly we'll bring the list
let's discuss up or down from there what you're recommending. I'm sure you didn't pull 230 out of the air, so it may be that you guys are in fact. I know that you guys might in fact be recommending that that's going to reflect what we need at a most urgent, time frame. But I get a little.
Actually, Mr. Clough alluded to, that as debt decreases, that we might enjoy some tax decreases. I know when I began working here 8 years ago, the annual debt service payment was $1 million. Projected in the coming year, it's $525,000. So there were a few years that went down $80,000-$90,000 a year. We didn't reserve any of that money for the catastrophe fund. Instead, you know, that was a savings to the general fund budget, which we appreciated in years when the budget was needed to go up quite a bit more for educational purposes. So again, yeah, you recall that 230 just came from because our debt service was going down again next year. That it would keep our total capital commitment the same.
Okay. That's right.
But
I knew you had a reason for it.
Yeah.
Um,
And I know there's guidelines that you have for what you can use capital reserve monies on, correct? And so I just
For
think that would be
product
interesting. That might just help educate us as to what your.
I think we've got to be, I think we have to develop a set of internal procedures that are more clearly stated. I mean, we have, yes, I think that we know what we're doing. There's reasons why we replaced the wallpaper, for instance. It wasn't just the cookie jar was open and let's go. It just made sense because of all the other enhancements we're doing to leave really not attractive wallpaper when we're doing so many other nice things. It made sense. We took out carpets quickly because we've had a pretty significant mold problem over the last couple of years in the summer. So why do we want to, so I mean there are reasons for that. So but I do think, not trying to be defending the decisions we've made, but to say that I think we do need to have a better set of internal procedures and always maintain a percentage of that capital reserve for the things that go bump in the night. And I think that that's sort of the first step. So is that 50% of that allotment? Is it 30%? You know, Neil McIntosh, who's our technician, he probably couldn't diagnose your tires any better than you could, but I don't mean to be flippant. He's really knows what the big system issues are, mechanicals. Yeah, I mean everything from the mixers to the boilers. He's very, very knowledgeable about, you know, the systems, and he monitors those regularly. So he certainly has a big part of these decisions that are made. But I think, Roger, we could put together those procedures. I think would be instructive for the board and for us as we go forward. But the points are well made tonight.
Another thing that we had in history, and it bothered me some, to be honest with you, we had a 5-year plan at one time. And I think it was a great thing to make up, but I think in a 5-year period of time it went defunct to the point that it went out of existence after it was initially created. I'm not sure that it was updated, but the fact is, as I recall, using that 5-year plan, there was a plan of where that capital reserve fund could be or would be used over a period of time, and not necessarily in the year that it became available.
And we'll get there. I would expect that would be sort of the goal, that we would get there. And as Dan had said, like this is our 3rd year, right? I think it's our 3rd year. So it continues, I think, to be a critical strategic planning tool around our projects and our properties. And
There's a lot of property here to maintain. We
It
have over
is.
500 people per day who visit each of one of our 3 buildings, and there's a lot of things that we could. Well, you've seen the list, and we can certainly update that and bring another one to you. But we only have about $45,000 in the district budget, you know, to have for operations and maintenance for all 3 buildings, which is not a lot. We could easily show what that line would look like when we want to add to just the regular maintenance that is just not being dealt with as it should be. But it's just gonna grow that line pretty quickly. So I think the inception of this idea was how to keep the impact, let the voters decide, you know, what they feel they want to do. But I think we do know, based on our overall assessment, where the needs are in the district. And quite frankly, the $45,000 doesn't begin to touch some of the things that need to be done. So.
Okay, Matt, you asked for our general feeling on the 230, and what I'd go to is this particular slide comparison to the proposed budget, for those of you with page 7. And I look at our budget increases, FY13, 5.5%. Then for 14 we had 2.1, 2.5, and now we're looking at 3.8 with no capital reserve. My feeling is, geez, we're already doing a bigger increase than normal. To throw on the 230 and go all the way up to nearly 5%. I agree with you. It feels big.
Yeah.
And I'm very much in support of the capital reserve budget, but maybe not $230, $230,000
yeah.
in support of it. It seems like, is there a middle ground where we're not pushing 5% increase
Right.
overall,
Yeah.
but still, where's that middle ground?
Right.
That's
So
my
that
own,
would-
my own personal.
I think I would concur. Does anybody feel differently? So maybe, Roger, with that guidance, if we want to, and I hate to be arbitrary, but it would be helpful, I think, with numbers, even if we just did look at like 100,000, because that we can manipulate differently, but also share with us sort of where we stand on our list of projects.
Yes.
And I know we had sort of a rolling list as we were knocking them off, and we've had that slide before, and just not in this round. So that would help us. And then whatever other insight you'd want to share around how things get on that list, or decisions and procedures, as Mark's alluding to. I know it's not arbitrary or capricious in any way. I know that there are certain definitions around capital projects that improve the overall assets and value of the district, and so that's what I understand when I think of capital improvements, and that's largely been what we've seen as we've done things like the security system, or the huge dishwasher system, or the floors at the elementary school. And sometimes, as with any project, knocking it all out at once saves money. Like we can think of that, of the projects that we do in our own homes. What you may save in not doing it right now will cost you twice as much to do it later, because you didn't do it when people were there and on the job. Sure. So I think we all completely understand that too. But that would be, I think, really helpful for the next round.
Also, how much is in the budget? I mean, how much is in the capital reserve right now? Just that number would be would obviously be valuable
that would
to
be
this
great.
conversation.
That was in your monitoring report.
did
a week
get
or two
that.
ago.
I
It's-
did
It
remember
was,
seeing
but
About-
if you could,
No,
We're
that
on a
is-
whole nother week, and we've had, I don't even know how many meetings since then. So we are trying to keep it all together. But so I think we are able to probably move along and look at superintendent succession. Please, Mark, if that.
Sure. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you so
Actually,
much.
would you mind if I stayed just for the succession? No, I just-
Not to be presumptuous, but you can stay as long as you want. We enjoy the company.
It's always a pleasure having you around.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it-
Definite glasses.
Even if we don't always agree with it.
Oh,
Have a good
dear.
time.
Let's,
Take it away.
thanks, Roger, for staying. Actually, it's important that you are part of this conversation.
Couldn't survive without it.
Yeah. Well, most superintendents couldn't. This is the annual report on superintendent succession. Just to remind the board, it's about emergency succession. And there are probably many scenarios that might work for you. One being that I break my leg and I'm out for 4 months, type of thing. It really is about unanticipated, the absence of the superintendent. I need to make sure that I've got the resources and supports in place so the community continues to be served through the board's work. So tonight's annual report is not a lot different than what you've seen in the past. I would like to highlight a few changes. There's some improvements to the language. I think it reads better in some instances. But most notably is in the last 3 versions of this, I identified 2 of my close district office colleagues as being ready to assume the reins as licensed superintendents, and only one of those people remains, and that's Ellen Thompson. For all the right reasons, Rogers decided not to bring back his superintendent's, to reapply for a superintendent's license. But we're still in capable hands with Ellen having that license, even though she hasn't been thoroughly tested in a number of those areas. I think that she has the good background knowledge and has seen now 2 superintendents work in their capacity of serving the board and working as a central office team member to be able to, I think, adequately address the district's needs in the short term. The other piece that I think, I believe it continues to get stronger is the leadership team's role in overseeing district work. So I just wanted, again, to highlight the importance of Jessica Little's role, Roger's role, in the 3 building principals' roles. They understand how I do my job, how I put together reports, how I serve the community through my leadership with the school board. And even though the principals wouldn't be directly sitting here, they would help to inform some of the monitoring that needs to happen with the executive limitations and clearly with the ends policy. The other piece that is worth noting is I do believe, and I added this, that I think there has to be an expectation that during the superintendent's absence that there be a dedicated time where the board chair or vice chair can be working directly with Roger and Ellen in preparation for board meetings or day-to-day operations and business things that come up from time to time. Have found my role with Brendan and now Kim to be just invaluable in being able to be on top of what I need to be on top of in preparation for serving the community. So I thought that needed to be expressed in this report. I also mentioned on page 2 that with the likelihood that there will be a red study committee, it's important that the district leadership team be well aware of what the components are of that study and that they be kept apprised of the study committee's progress. I believe that both Judy DeNova and myself will be in a role of serving that committee in some capacity, probably with data and information. But it's really important that Ellen and Roger and Jessica be prepared, less probably so with principals, but that the district leadership be really kept apprised and closely aligned with what that work looks like. And whoever the board member is who's to serve on that committee, I think, again, there probably is a nexus there between that representative and the district leadership team to keep people all on the same page. Lastly, is just making a point that during the Superintendent's Act, unexcused, or it would be excused, of course, unanticipated. So I found my way down to Mexico. I'll be back, trust me. Where I lost my train of thought. Yeah, had to do with the board's work calendar. Thanks, Rachel. That more than likely there would need to be some adjustments to the annual work calendar, and I wouldn't expect that the same level of effort would be able to go into the monitoring report if they're new to the executive limitations, especially. I'm less concerned about the ends because I think we're getting better at what that looks like in the future. But the executive limitations, Roger, as you know, plays a big role with the financial piece of it. Mm-hmm. But the board may want to adjust based on the superintendent's absence and respond accordingly, and that's reflected in this report this year as well. So other than that, those were some of the enhancements I felt were important to bring forward this year, and I have no intention of breaking my leg or going to Mexico. But
I say we just make our next board meeting.
I know. We're doing a field trip, field study, and that you can come, and you guys too.
But I do feel that we've got just a stellar board and a great leadership team that is quite capable of maintaining the work in that short period of time.
Questions, team?
I do have two thoughts. One seems kind of cold, but what would it cost us if you were out for 3 months? What would there be costs to the district associated with that? And I could imagine the answer might be no, but I'm just trying to think, because obviously I would assume your salary or whatever when we have disability insurance or things like that. But
yeah.
Obviously, if Ellen is suddenly doing your job, who's doing Ellen's job?
Yeah.
Who are we bringing in?
Yeah.
To cover?
Yeah.
Would it cost us?
Yeah. Good question. I hadn't thought about that. Just immediately, I don't think you'd want to sub superintendent. I think that we're, I think that we have the resources. A thing I mentioned in here that I would expect Judy would do a reach out to Jeff Francis, executive director of the VSA, and the Champlain Valley Superintendent's Group, which I think I mentioned for the first time here. So there are resources for Ellen when she bumps up against things. Even though Roger doesn't have a license to practice in Vermont, Roger's would be a huge asset, as would Jessica. So I don't think we need any other bodies, and I think we've got the services of others who would, I think, graciously provide the support if we needed it. If we go forward with Chittenden Central this coming year through a RED study, I think there's support there through their business office and through their leadership team, who also could be supportive. I have accumulated sick time since I've been here for 5 years. I think I've been out 3 days for sick time, so those days are available to me up to a certain amount. So I would continue if to draw a salary as long as I had available sick time if it were sick time.
Right.
It was the reason I was out, which I think it probably would be, but
I would assume so.
yeah.
Unless it was the Cancun.
Yeah, unless I was consulting in Dubai or something.
In the past, what has happened?
But good question, Dan.
If, I'm going to pick on Roger because he's sitting there. If Roger picks up additional responsibility for the superintendent because he is gone, and obviously continues to do 100% of his current job, there's been a little bit of a bonus in there.
Okay.
And the piece that you added, Mark, that sort of speaks to that is the idea that we would, as a board, need to look at the work plan and really prioritize our expectations of the superintendent with respect to that plan. And there may be things that, sometimes end up feeling more pro forma, that we still, ask good questions of, but they might be reports that would be able to wait, that we could just less formally check in. And I know these reports take Mark time, so it would be more, I could envision a situation that we would be less formal about our requirements around some of that stuff. Probably not ends reporting. There's a lot of support that Mark gets from the team that would still be around to put that together anyway. So I thought that was a key addition, Mark, as a matter of fact.
I should temper my statement to say that if Mark broke his leg and he was only going to be out for 1 week, that's a little bit different than being out for 3 months.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are currently negotiating, as you know, with the teacher bargaining unit and support staff bargaining unit, and that takes some time, some acumen around how that works. And, certainly I've got a lot of support to help support the board in those efforts, but there may be an extra cost for attorney services.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be somewhat situational depending on sort of where we are at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you raise a good point, David. What's the conditions of the unplanned leave of absence and what needs to be? I mean, it could vary greatly. Yeah.
Something that the board would have to discuss at the time.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. Any other questions?
But I guess, excuse me, Kim, that's good feedback for me in your feedback monitoring report, because I think I might want to add that next year in terms of in the succession plan. Is there a financial component that isn't spoken to here? So thanks for that feedback. I might want to address that sometime.
Even if it says there may be financial,
Yeah.
Yeah.
would be adequate as far as I'm concerned.
Terrific.
Try not to be too explicit.
If there are no other questions or comments or concerns, I would happily take a motion to approve the monitoring report.
I make a motion that we accept monitoring report. Sorry.
2.7?
Where
were we? 2.5, sorry. 2.5.
Superintendent succession as presented.
Do I have a second? Yeah, sure. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Moving right along. Yeah.
Motorcycles in storage.
Oh, good. We won't get down that hill of yours, I guess. Right? All right, so we're a touch behind, but I think that we'll get it all in anyway. And I'm going to turn it over to Cashel if I can, who was prepared with all of this last week and was very generous in letting us table it so that we could give it a little more attention this week. So thanks, Cashel. It's on. Oh, do we have to take it off the table?
Take it off of the motion, don't we?
I don't know, if you don't know, David, then I certainly don't know.
Let's take it off the table with a motion to make sure.
Okay, why don't you make that motion?
Make a motion, we take the various policies off the table for discussion.
How about also the 4.7 monitoring report? Would
Yeah,
you
that
do
sounds
both
good
of those?
too.
So you're making a motion to take 4.7 off?
Off the table,
So
not
to
off
the-
the agenda.
Off
We
the
had
table.
apparently tabled it last week.
Well, we put
as
it
opposed
last
to just
week.
moving it to the next agenda.
So we're making a motion to
To bring it back to the
onto
table.
agenda.
Yep.
I'll bring it back
Yep.
onto the,
Yep,
to discuss
just
it.
in case we need to, because we're not sure we need to, but we'd rather be safe than sorry. Do I have a second on David's?
I will second that
Okay.
motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank
You're not
you.
commissioned at all.
So Cashel, take it away on 4.7 if you don't mind. I know it's been waiting for our attention.
So I noticed one little error just now, because I was remembering
In the vein of
we
finding
had initially
typos.
called it 4.9,
Oh,
but when
that's
we
right.
changed the numbers,
Yeah.
so in my notes, it still said 4.9.2 or whatever.
Yes.
I just changed it
Got it.
on the live document.
Okay.
So basically, I said we're in compliance with this board self-evaluation policy. I did make notes on 4.7.2, which was the annual board self-evaluation in conjunction with the appraisal of the superintendent. The board may request the administration or an external party or both to assist in making its self-evaluation. So I said we were in compliance with that, but I wanted to note in here the mechanisms that we put in place to sort of monitor ourselves on a monthly basis, or meeting by meeting basis rather. And so I made some notes in there regarding that, and that we were actively using it, and that we can use that to contribute to our end of year summary, and overall interpretations from Mark and Kim. And I gave a little initial overview on what I've learned from those monthly or the regular meeting reports. Basically, it's all very positive, that everybody feels that we're prepared and the appropriate time is spent on the right things, and that everybody's given an equal opportunity to participate in conversation, things like that. So just food for thought would be, do we need to ask ourselves different questions?
Yeah.
If we're, if we're all like, we're doing everything great.
Right.
Well, where's the opportunity for constructive criticism? So I mean, we're in compliance in the way we laid
yeah.
it out. We're
Yeah.
using what we said we were going to use, but that was just something that I was thinking about when I was looking at that if we're always getting a positive report, does
Yeah.
that really mean we're doing a good job, or does,
Or do we have, like,
are
a
we asking the
space
right
for,
questions?
Posing that? Is there something we could have done differently, or
Right.
figuring out how to craft that question
Yeah.
that gets to that piece?
Exactly, yeah.
That
And
would
there
be
is
great
an
from a
open
development
comments.
standpoint for all of our work.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I know. I wonder if the open comments section, we can come up with the right question
Mhm.
that really prompts that thinking a little differently than
Right.
just additional
Right,
comments.
yep.
That's a good thought.
For point 3 and point 4, I said in partial compliance. Those are related to, this was about distributing the report.
Yeah, we
on,
definitely didn't do that.
yeah,
this
so
summer.
that was, I was like,
We
I don't
definitely
think
didn't
we
do that
did
this summer.
that.
No.
We discussed it, which
Yeah,
is why
we
I said it was
discussed
partial. So we didn't
how
get a
didn't really
written
do a good
report.
job of keeping track of those.
Yeah.
And so this, having it electronic is just awesome.
Right. That should help us be in complete compliance moving forward. And then point 4 was the board to discuss and interpret the outcomes of that self-evaluation, formulate a work plan to highlight specific goals and objectives. So we did that, but I noted here, maybe we're not doing such a good job of keeping those goals in mind, but not
Yeah.
because we don't want to, but with negotiations and budgeting all happening, it's just naturally falling behind, which is why I said again that we were partial there. Just the intentions are there and the plan's there, but the reality is,
And that's something
know.
that Mark and I can maybe do differently, and even the agenda, even if that is, we spend a couple minutes just leading with a reminder on what they are and how what else is on the agenda is lending itself to that focus. And
Right.
I think that in addition to negotiations with the conversation around studying potential consolidation, there's been a lot of distraction that I think we had talked even that might be something we would do, that things that show up on our agenda get our attention, and things that don't tend not to have the specific attention. So I think we can think about that when we're doing our agenda planning. That's a great point.
But I also just don't want us, some of these things that are coming forward are priorities.
Absolutely.
And I don't want us to
Which
water
is,
down
I
our
think, why,
priorities.
yeah.
It's not that these aren't important, but
I think it might even just be a matter of
reminders.
reminders, because I think
Yeah.
that there is probably good thinking that could imagine how any one of the things that we're doing, I mean, we really are pretty disciplined to not take things up at this table that aren't, spoken to in policy, that aren't our job. And so I don't doubt that that is in fact happening with all of these things that are coming at us. But I think if we could at least spend a little time as we're putting the agenda together, thinking about, are some of these speaking to actually working towards certain goals, and just acknowledge it even, or
Right.
say, at this point, here are the goals that we had out, and in any situation, in any organization, often you have to sort of keep your knees soft and go with the flow.
Yeah,
and
I agree. I think just helping keep, I mean, it's in our work
But
plan,
putting it
it's
out
on the
there.
calendar and
Yeah.
stuff, but I think just that sort of meeting reminder to say, oh, don't forget, we had a goal of
Yeah,
doing this.
yeah.
And, like with all
the
of
superintendent
other-
evaluation, I know that
Yeah.
like that hangs
Right.
out there, and every now and then we get an email about when we're going to meet with the support that the VSBA is willing to offer us on that.
Yeah.
So it's not that we've forgotten about it, it's just that we literally can't find one more time to meet. It's so much fun, Mark and I, the time we spend together. But so while we may not have forgotten about some of them, or sort of knowing they need to sit in the back for right now, I think our occasion to have that be something we at least touch on here is important. I appreciate that suggestion.
So that was the end of my report. Overall, we are in compliance, and just kind of be mindful and think of a couple things for, I guess, next summer, looking at our self-evaluation.
Any questions for Cashel, or thoughts or comments?
Good job on your first one.
It was awesome.
So, shall we have the motion?
Yes, please.
Dave's pointing at me, so
Thank
I make a motion that we accept monitoring report 4.7,
Yes.
renamed from 4.9,
Correct.
as presented.
Any second on that?
Second that.
Okay, any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. As opposed, passes 5-0. Thank you so much, Cashel. Yeah, that was awesome. You are officially no longer a rookie, which you're gonna maybe wish you were, because now you're in the rotation.
No, we won't do it.
No, this is this Cashel really took it on full
Yep.
force this meeting, because she's also bringing to us the policies that she had shared a bit ago for us to take a look at, ask her any questions. And you can speak to Cashel. I think you largely grabbed the VSBA language, and that was sort of the charge. Get us to draft language on those that we were updating to reflect the current
Exactly.
VSBA language on the mandatory policy.
And then I also added, because we had discussed that reviewed little
Yes.
tag,
Yes.
so that when we look at these in the future, the policy may not have needed an update, but we've reviewed it. We've looked at this, so that we don't think, gee, we haven't looked at this in 10 years.
And we won't
It's like, no, well,
remember.
we reviewed it
Yeah.
a year ago, so
That's
and it didn't need
Yep,
any changes.
I
Yeah.
think that's great. I love that.
So I think
That's
that'll
great.
just be a helpful reference. And yeah, I dropped it, all of this with the exception of, there was a little highlight further down, I forget which one it's on, but is the VSBA language edited obviously to reference Essex Town School District and Essex, wherever that was relevant.
So where the highlights are the recommendations that
for this board to consider integrated into the existing policy casual? Is that how you?
Basically.
That was your methodology?
Yeah, so
not
if-
all of, not everyone changed, but just the ones that are highlighted are the ones who are new languages.
No.
It's the VSBA.
What you see is all the VSBA language. These are all the ones that we decided we would adopt the VSBA language for.
So it's different from the one we had
It will be
in
different than what we
1999.
have,
Yeah.
but correct. But
Yeah,
these are the
okay.
ones that had the most
Just wanna
minor
check my assumption
differences.
there, yeah.
Mhm. And if there was anything, I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've looked
Yeah.
at these. Just scrolling through. So down, like on the last page, for example.
Drug and alcohol policy, is that the highlighted one you're?
I did highlight something in there, but let me just drop
Okay.
down to that transportation.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all at the end, Kimberly.
It's, yeah, it's, yep. On the next, you can go to the next page there. So these were two, so the yellow, I think this was something we didn't have in our existing.
right.
Like, the rest of it was, the language was mostly the same.
Yes.
But that yellow was in VSBA and not previously in ours. And then the blue was something that I put in based on our conversation when we initially reviewed these, was should that potentially be referenced in this policy? The fact that we've taken these, safety and monitoring measures, or does that really fall into procedure? I was unclear on that, so that's why I highlighted it. So that one we may.
So the blue is not VSBA, the blue
Correct.
is what we've been.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yellow is VSBA, but
VSBA,
different
but was,
from
yeah,
what
not
we had.
existing in
Yeah.
ours in any way. So,
I think that I would propose a change to the blue. Rather than say student safety measures, I think I would say rules. Because one, for example, which is kind of universal no matter where you are, is to obey the directions of the driver. But I'm not sure that that would be specifically safety.
mm-hmm.
What happens in practice, Mark, as we've sort of put into place this video surveillance? Is there anything that sort of speaks to our relationship with our contracted provider on these things and our, I guess it's a training or conversation around expectations?
First Student who is our contractor currently, is responsible for all training for their drivers, and there is a before school starts orientation, and we've reached out and we do quite a bit of work with individual buses where there might be the ridership requires more support.
Well chosen.
So I don't have any objection to that, but that is more means oriented. I
Yeah,
think
that's-
I could,
that was
and
my
you've started to
question.
see some of the data come through the ENDS monitoring report in
Yeah.
terms of are the efforts underway in terms of working with first student having a result on student behavior. It certainly is something we do, but it really is the contractor's responsibility to. That's part of our bidding process. It's clearly defined in the bid specs that that's what they need to do.
Well, I'm wondering, in that it's in our bid specs then, and in, the policy, does that support that needs to happen? It is happening. Can we envision a reason or why we wouldn't want that happening,
No, I don't think there's any.
or even requiring there would be any time during which we would not require that?
It's a given. You would hope that would be occurring, so I don't think there's any
Right.
reason why it shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
The one that's in, we call it yellow. It's not really yellow. It's
It is on this.
Yeah, it's yellow on my screen.
It looks like peace.
Yeah,
It
yeah. I would want to try to integrate that into an existing executive limitations monitoring report. So it doesn't. I don't have an annual report to the board. We have annual. I have executive limitation reports, and it might go in there somewhere, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to have a standalone report just on the bus
that
Right.
makes sense.
bus stuff. So
Yeah.
that would be just something we'd want
Could
to.
be a change of
Yeah,
that wording.
yeah. The other piece, if Kimberly, right above, there's a 1 through 9 section in terms of how decisions are made around routing. I think, I mean, what might be implied here, but I just want to be sure, is that there's also financial implications, and that's not mentioned here. I think it's in there because then you'll see in draft number 2, you know, of the budget, you know, that's a consideration. It has to be. And so through efficiencies comes better routing, but there's also, what's driving that for me at this point is cost. So I don't know if that needs to be expressed, you know, it's not in the VSBA models policy, but it's certainly something that I pay attention to.
And it should be something that's paid attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it lives in there somewhere, but it's
Yeah,
not stated explicitly.
Explicit, yeah. So, I mean,
So when someone says, well, I want to bus down McGillicuddy Road, well, that would be nice, but I'd have to add another half a
yeah.
bus route, and I don't have the resources to
Yeah,
do that. I mean,
yeah.
I've said that.
It might be 500 feet long.
Yeah, I mean, I don't say it that way, but that's certainly a consideration.
So would that be something that could simply be added here as
I would
a number
offer
10,
that as a
you
friendly
know,
amendment
yeah.
to it.
So we're just talking about adding in, making that sentence, after considering both safety of children, efficiency of operations, and cost.
Yeah.
Where
That's all
was
along
that?
those
Where
lines.
is that?
Second line under implementation.
Top.
Just simply
Yep, up
safety
there.
of children,
Okay.
efficiency of operation and cost.
Okay.
In which case we should, for proper English, take the word both out, because now we have 3 items.
Yes.
Considering the safety of children,
Comma,
efficiency,
efficiency of operation and cost.
cost.
Is that? Do you have that, Kasia?
I'm trying to download it.
Okay.
From
No,
yeah,
that's-
it wasn't giving me an editable version. I will add that though.
And then,
I would also frankly agree with Dave on his earlier comment. If we're gonna add a word or two in, back down on the blue highlight. I understand the idea of, do we need the blue highlight?
Right.
Or is that procedure? But I agree with Dave that if we have that blue highlight in there,
Take the word measure
I
out.
think having, well, no, actually add in, I wouldn't take measured, safety measure, because I think that should be reviewed also, but, and rules. So simply adding more words in there.
Well, the rules would take into account safety,
But
safety wouldn't necessarily take into account some of the specific
But honestly,
rules
because,
of the bus.
for instance, the cameras are a safety measure, but they're not a rule. So they
Right.
don't overlap completely. Yes, they do overlap a little. Some of the rules are safety measures, some of the safety measures are rules. But I think adding in your word about rules would be.
So do you
and
think?
we speak to rules a couple paragraphs up when we say that the rules and
Do you think
regulations
take that
regarding
out?
student transportation are
Oh, I
prepared
see.
annually
Wasn't even
and
thinking about
included in
that
the
one.
parent-student
Oh, I
handbook.
was
So
thinking,
Yeah.
Here.
we'll review
Referencing
student safety
that
measures
idea.
and rules aboard school buses. That would be my way of integrating Dave's
There we go.
word.
So,
I was just gonna hop up to that yellow or pea green section there, and do you want me to pull out how do we reflect that no annual report piece, Mark, is what I'm getting at. So just will submit to us the contracts, leases, et cetera. I mean, I think that is
which we have
implied
to
as
approve
well,
those.
right? We have to.
I mean,
but-
that piece of it, we,
Not the second part
we-
of that sentence.
Well, you can put,
We see
just
the
take the word
bids.
annual report, just put annual monitoring report, or there's some,
Oh yeah.
some
or-
language in there
yeah.
that makes it more
Okay.
germane to how
Mhm.
it's, how I operate here.
Okay.
Again, I don't know where that would go at this time, I have to
Is
think
it
about
like-
it.
I'm not sure which one it would be in either. There are, like, technical reports that you guys provide to the state regarding transportation, and that might be where this mandatory policy is pointing, because I would be surprised if we're not.
Yeah, that's just ridership really, so we can get
Mhm.
a per cost of.
Well, but
what if we,
that's-
go on,
Oh, go ahead.
what if we made that sentence, just in our wordsmithing efforts here, shall include in in an appropriate
Yeah.
monitoring report, or shall include annually in an appropriate monitoring report to the board, information as to all pupils' transport.
And
Because-
then
that
it's
would-
probably
that would mean
indicated
the-
somewhere.
Yeah, it could be communication in support to the board. Could come under incidentals. I mean, if all it's asking for is, I don't know. I have to think about it.
Because
If it
if
is a
that-
lot, there's a lot there, or it could
Yeah.
be a little,
Mhm.
depending on what your
Right.
interest is. But
Well, and it might just be, I think we speak of it almost most at budget time, or if it's a behavior or treatment of students
Right.
issue, it comes in a different place. Like if you were to be tripling up every seat in the bus, we would be hearing about it. You know, every bus, every kid, every, that would be something that would come up maybe someplace else.
yeah, I mean, currently, does the board sign off on the transportation contract?
We don't sign the contract, I don't think, but we definitely
It's
see
an
the
approval on the
outcomes of.
consent agenda.
It's a
Yeah.
consent agenda approval
And-
of the.
And that is what this is
Yeah. Okay. So.
asking for.
Yeah, I could definitely see it fitting under treatment of students.
Yeah.
Being one paragraph of
Yeah.
that report.
How about instead of his or her, we just say an
That's
annual
what I did,
report
yeah.
to the board.
I did
as a-
exactly that.
You know, it'll show up
In
somewhere.
an
We'll get it
in
in
an
some
appropriate,
fashion.
in an appropriate monitoring report is what I
Yeah.
typed. Okay.
Or you could even say it, so it doesn't. It may not be as formal as a monitoring report, like an
Take out the word
an
monitoring.
appropriate report
Okay.
to the board. So if it, for some reason, didn't. I mean, it does seem as though it would be one of the things, that, sort of like the bullying incidents or whatever else, that you might just provide us that report around treatment of students or something.
But this
And-
is specifically leading to information as to all people transfer. I guess I'm just reading it as it's more like a budgetary
Numbers, yeah,
numbers
we get
thing.
it. So
You know, just
an
how many
appropriate
kids are
report, it's
we
gonna show up
transporting, and
somewhere.
how many,
Yeah.
it's gonna show up in budgets, it's gonna, in the expense.
Yeah.
But the
don't
next
think we have to
paragraph or the
worry.
other
Yeah.
things where we're speaking to rules and regulations that are prepared annually and included in the parent-student handbook, that component of it, I think, might have its place somewhere in the treatment of student impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll be reported a couple of places.
Just little pieces will come in.
These look great to
And
me.
then the only other one that I had that yellow on, or the pea soup on,
Mhm.
is under the drug and alcohol policy, which falls mostly on page 4,
Mhm.
I think, or 3.
2 and 3 maybe,
3.
something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
We just went by it,
Just went by
Kimberly.
it.
A little further.
There
There
you
you go.
This is VSBA
This was VSBA language, again, that was not explicitly written this way in ours.
Would this be part of their contract? Or anything in there? I'm just curious.
I think this would supersede contract. I mean, if it were policy, then I would obviously need to let employees know that they have a responsibility if there was a no plea or a conviction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
And it's
it's,
pretty customary too
Okay.
in the public sector. I mean, if you,
Okay.
something happens, you should report to your employer.
Yeah.
But, so, I would just need to
This
let
has
the union know that.
details of days,
yeah.
no later than 5 days, within 10 days of notification. The superintendent can notify federal and state officers, so. That was the only change.
So as long as that's
It's
something
all
that you would
VS.
make sure is happening, Mark, that
Yeah.
seems as though it's required, so we should probably go with it.
Okay. I will highlight it.
I had a question
Yeah.
under volunteers and work study students, and it's more for all of us. And Mark, I think, was
Go up a little, Kimberly, you
it's
got it?
under policy, the piece where we're speaking to the very last sentence of that policy says at the option of the school board, this prohibition could be extended to include volunteers as well as work study students. So we're talking about the Vermont Internet
You're at
Sex
you're on a
Offender
different
Registry.
policy now, Kim, sorry.
Okay.
Is that correct?
So that under the legal reference, the last paragraph that is the legal reference under
within
volunteer and work
alcohol,
study.
you mean? Oh,
No.
oh.
Volunteer and work study.
Which is right here.
No, so go up further,
Up a
Kimberly.
little further. Right there. Oh no.
Yeah,
Uh,
just down a little
yes,
bit.
down just a little bit. So this legal reference part, the law further provides that a person who is on the Vermont Internet Sex Offender Registry shall not be able to be a work-study student. And then it says, at the option of the school board, this prohibition could be extended to include volunteers as well as work-study students. I am assuming, and maybe I should not assume, that as volunteers we have to provide information to Lorna to be able to be a volunteer. You guys are doing some sort of cursory screening on that,
Yep.
and that if we were to appear on the sex offenders registry, we are not eligible to volunteer. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a difference between in classroom and out of
Yeah,
classroom.
but if they are, you know, this, they would not be in either if they were on the registry.
Good.
So
That's
right,
what
and
it
so
is.
I
Smart move, Mrs.
I think I was hoping that was the answer, and I was thinking we don't want to
And
leave
there
that
hasn't-
last
there
sentence.
hasn't
We
been any
want
of
to be
that.
explicit.
Yes, I would agree.
So I think
person.
where we every place we have work study student, we add or volunteer. In that policy
In the
part.
legal reference?
Yeah,
or
the
whole thing?
screening.
Policy.
The word
Um,
policy, the section on policy.
Yes, so in the middle of that policy paragraph, the screening process utilized by the school district
Yeah.
includes, for any person being considered for service, it says as a work
Yeah.
study student,
Or
we would say
volunteer.
or volunteer, and it shall not be eligible to work. There you go. So I would have all of that, and I don't even know if we need that last sentence at the end
Yeah.
of the legal reference, unless we're gonna say the school board has extended this to include volunteers as well as work study
Yeah,
students.
there are many districts around Vermont that don't do what we do, but that's in fact how that's the practice.
I think actually maybe we leave it casual and we just say, the school board has extended this prohibition to include volunteers as well as work study
The,
students.
I'll do ETSD.
Yes, school board has extended this prohibition to include volunteers as well as work study students. So we might as well be clear that we've
Yeah.
made that
Okay.
decision.
Got it.
Awesome, thank you. So those were awesome drafts, and I assume not first reading, right? So we'll warn it for first reading for our next meeting
Maybe in January.
in January. Yay!
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
I
This was on our list.
I know.
It was on
that's
our
the goal,
goals.
so-
See, and that's what I'm thinking. That if Mark and I are really mindful and thoughtful about it, that we're going to be able to figure out the work we're doing and how it relates to that, which we
Yeah.
really said we wanted to do.
Yeah.
So even when we're sidetracked, I think there's stuff we're getting done that we really were very intentional about.
The one question I have, I just want to make sure, and I can't remember, but the HIPAA policy, it states the second one in here.
Yeah.
It speaks specifically to employees with the insurance through the school, or through, do we have any policy on HIPAA other than, or does the federal just oversee like anything that we deal with health-wise for our students? Okay,
It's the,
so
if I
it's,
understand the question, it's a federal law that
okay.
we follow.
Okay.
If that's what
so
you're
we don't need a
asking.
separate policy. Well, that's just why do we need a separate policy for this? But
Yeah.
Right.
It
not
is
for
federal law
student.
anyway.
So I just
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah,
clarify
okay.
that. That was just a question.
Yeah.
Because because the first sentence is speaking to related to health benefits, or I see what you're saying, Rachel. Like it's being specific to say health employee benefits or a group health plan, where it's also inclusive of our treatment of private information around student health.
So I was just.
But they didn't.
putting that
That
out
wasn't
there.
anywhere in their language, right? I feel like it must be
That
spoken
is-
to elsewhere.
Completely the VSBA.
That's, I think, student privacy or something. There's like a mandatory
is
policy
student-
on student
Okay. We
privacy,
have
right?
one,
We
yeah.
have
Okay,
it.
I just couldn't remember.
Yeah.
I just
That's what I
it
was
didn't feel
looking
right to
for.
have this for one group without
Yeah.
covering
Yeah,
the others, and I
makes
just wanted to
sense.
make sure it
Maybe
was
one
there.
if we more recently updated or.
Yeah. Or wasn't as.
This, ours was updated in November of 2011.
Yeah.
The board's was for student
Shows
privacy.
that.
Is
Okay.
that in there? I presume.
Okay.
People privacy rights, PPRA.
Okay. There we go.
Personal information, yeah. Yep.
Awesome.
So as long as they-
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted
Good
to
catch.
check that's
Upload the
there.
changes
Yeah,
and reshare that.
thank you.
Did you say there'll be one for first readings on your stuff?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kimberly.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're rocking and rolling.
I would like to say that we're 40 seconds ahead of schedule.
Yes. Thank you very much. I am putting you in charge of the clock, mister.
I just happen to notice.
I appreciate those reminders, though. I really do. So Mark had shared with us the sample or the language for the motion that we will take up tomorrow. I understand from the Westford meeting they had positive sentiment around the notion of a study. So I would expect that we should see support of the study itself. And we were just exchanging today in trying to gather a little bit more information around the process, but the breakdown will require us to have 10 people from Essex, one of them being a board member. So I don't, do we figure out who that person is for the next meeting, or once we
No, because,
approve the study, know the composition of the group, then we need to solicit for folks to serve on that committee. And among the questions I posed today was, can we have a rough idea of the number of months this will take, the number of meetings per month, the approximate time frame. So I think before we can be fair in asking people to do this, we need a little more information around what that commitment involves. And so whether that is part of the discussion tomorrow or part of the work that the board chairs need to do to get that information and get the solicitation.
I think it's probably the latter. I believe Von Altimus will be at the meeting tomorrow night. He's offered to come and just be a resource to the group to answer some of these initial questions. Westford, I believe, has already drafted what a letter might look like that goes out, and I think the recommendation would be whatever goes out to try to elicit interest should be across all three communities.
Yeah. So I think that's all we really have for update, except that we will get to join each other again tomorrow evening at 6:30, lest you'd forgotten.
It shouldn't be 3 hours, right?
It should not be. It should not be.
It can't be.
No, it should be much quicker. I think the setting the stage conversation really happened before, and needing to come back to the conversation to be prepared to take a vote and a motion to enter the study, get a little more clarity around the technicalities, and then charge us to sort of go forward from there to solicit the participation. But running parallel to that, and I think also important to the process, is a community engagement or communication steering committee. And in a conversation, I had a pretty extensive conversation with Sue McCormick, which was great, and she's not sure of her availability. And I'm not sure that we know what the resources are to get professional support on that part of the work. But that communication or an engagement subcommittee, or not a subcommittee, it'd be a separate steering committee, wouldn't be as prescribed in the proportion of people coming from where. I think that should have a very deliberate, make sure there's a student, make sure that there's, not that there shouldn't be a student on the study committee, but I think that should represent what we need in terms of feedback loop from the community. And so it may be that we figure out if one of us can do that role too. And it sounded like Liz Subin might be willing to lead that charge with that group, and have these two groups having some version of a continuous loop, because there'll be a lot of technical stuff the study committee needs to get through. And then I think very importantly that there's a information loop going back to the community, but I think the study committee needs to be, even in their very prescribed work, informed by what our communities are understanding of their values around education, their views of opportunities, views of concerns, and what they need to understand to feel like whatever the outcome of the study committee is valid. And I think that there's a missed opportunity and a real risk if we're not doing all of that together. And so I hope that that will be even a small piece of the conversation tomorrow night, but then as we're planning, a very deliberate piece is an interest of mine, because I think that our community has come to expect that with the work that's happened more recently with Heart and Soul. So, all right, that's what I've got, folks. And we could do our self-evaluation. Are we doing a good job of doing these later, or do we want to take a few minutes now since we're not even super late, although it's 9 o'clock?
You
So
guys should have some pie too.
oh, let's have a piece of pie and do our reports.
Give the
Okay.
leftovers.
Matt, would you like a piece of pie? He's so we, you know what? Our tan was
right
picking up
up
your
and-
belly. No.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna offer that we are going to, our next meeting is, I think, January 12th. If you guys will indulge me, I did not check to see what we have on the work calendar to see if anybody is up, if we are up for another monitoring report of ours. So do you want to pull that up and just check, Cashel? And then we'll work that into the future agenda. And if we can make sure we do our board evaluations, then we could also adjourn.
So
It
shall
won't-
I? Oh,
If
we'll
we
wait
wait
for
just
that
1 second,
first,
if we
yeah.
can.
3.3.
Yeah.
Do you have your book open?
Monitoring report 3.3.
Which is delegation to the superintendent.
All right.
Is it no?
Who did? Can you see who did it last time? On the school's website, we could.
Yeah, I don't think I have the most
Oh,
recent.
no, I don't think. Matt, I don't feel like I got you a big enough piece.
You can come
I
back.
do not have
You
one.
can have a second one. Absolutely, you could. There you go.
You want a Whopper on
Take
it?
a cool
Yeah.
napkin.
That might actually be kind of good.
There you go.
Where did I look at here, right?
Well, since the monitoring reports, yeah, that should have the most recent one on it.
Kimberly, would you like a piece?
You have to earn your pie.
I know. Oh my gosh, I feel like every time I turn around.
Doesn't say who did it.
David, would you like
Well,
a piece of pie?
That's the report, that's the policy. Is there one
Oh, here.
monitoring report? There we go.
That was a link.
Pattern needs a piece.
I gave him one. He may come back for a second, but I did get
Should be
him
up
one.
top. Should be. Wow. Whoever wrote it didn't put their name on it.
I think I did.
Let's
No,
see
I'm
if we-
kidding.
let's go down and read.
Really verbose? It was me. No.
It's not on.
5 is.
Take
Oh
it
my
out.
gosh, this is
Everybody,
totally
good meeting.
mangled,
See you
David. I'm
tomorrow
so sorry. Thank you.
7:30, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, these is.
Oh, 6:30?
I am
was gonna
now
say,
scooping
oh.
it out. I'm so sorry, David. That is a mess.
No, it doesn't.
Gives
Doesn't
no
tell us.
clue. Gives
No
no
clue.
clue who did it.
All right.
Okay, let me.
Probably Brendan.
What is? What
No,
Who
Dan
did
would.
what?
I would probably be the one most likely. Forget to put my name on it.
guys?
Come on.
It's,
Thank you.
What? Monitoring report 3.1.
3.3.
3.3.
What's the?
What's the? Can
what's
you
the-
just read what it is?
Delegation to the superintendent with
We were fully in compliance last time.
Were we? So it'll be a quick one for whomever's
It should be
willing to
pretty
take
quick.
it up.
I'll do it.
On that note.
Yay.
On that note, I'll do it. No.
Sold. Perfect.
Okay, great.
I'm trying
Thank
to
you.
build up my volume now.
I know.
So
And I'm
when I
trying not to
crazy
say yes
busy
to anything
later
else right
on-
now,
Done
to be
enough.
honest.
I-
And Cash is
I am
good.
trying to think, keep
No, I
in
wasn't
mind
saying that
who's
for
on
me. I was pretending to be
negotiations,
Rachel.
That they should be encouraged to do more. you
Yeah,
know.
I'm feeling
I'm
good
trying
about
to
that
think about
idea.
that.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Yes, 3.3, and Rachel's
3.3,
taking it.
I'll take it.
Thank you.
Woohoo, Rachel.
I'm glad you
Okay.
believe in that theory, but whether
I'm
it really
gonna
works
say-
might be another thing.
Connor and Matt can do
we
that.
need a-
For, you guys can
we still
split
need
that
to-
for a second
I'm
one.
motion that we're done.
All right. And do we have a second one?
I'll second.
All right.
Whoever
All those in
first did.
favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're out. Thank you
With a
guys.
mouthful
Happy
of apple
holidays.
pie.